Hey everyone, I'm Lyle Burks with the Viking Speaks. This is the 48 Laws of Power. Hey everyone, I'm Lyle Burks with the Viking Speaks. Welcome back to the 90-day challenge. This is day 70 with the 48 Laws of Power, Law 23. Concentrate your forces. Conserve your forces and energies by keeping them concentrated at their strongest point. You gain more by finding a rich mine and mining it deeper than by flitting from one shallow mine to another. Intensity defeats extensity every time. When looking for sources of power to elevate you, find the one key patron and fat cow who will give you milk for years to come. So he does go over both the transgression and observance of the law on this. So we'll start with the transgression. Back in the Chinese dynasty of Wu, the kingdom of Wu, the king at the moment, this was around the late 400 BC. No, correction, that's AD. And he was interested in power. And at the time, the Middle Kingdom had been the center of Chinese power and culture for centuries. So he knew that if he focused his powers on and his efforts on trying to take down that kingdom, it would greatly intensify his power and make the kingdom of Wu the stronghold for China for centuries to come. So he made that his goal, and over time he set out to start attacking the Middle Kingdom. Set up a whole campaign and everything. Now, Middle Kingdom hadn't made any attempt prior to this to take on Wu. They were good. They had no reason to fight. The king in Wu wanted more power, so he started a fight. And one of the ministers to the king began to take notice of certain things outside of the own kingdom. Now, over the battles between Wu and the Middle Kingdom, the kingdom of Wu had made many victories. And so the war, as the king felt, was going pretty well, and all he felt he needed was one final big victory to take them down. But unfortunately, when you're a smaller force and you focus all your efforts on one side, you leave your other side vulnerable. Well, there was the barbarian state just south of the kingdom of Wu that was taking notice of this. So they waited. And the minister saw this, and he warned the king. He said, "Look, sir, I understand your ambition here, but the barbarians are beginning to take notice, and there are whispers that they're going to invade and take over our kingdom the next time you try to take over the Middle Kingdom and leave us vulnerable." The king laughed, told him he was essentially nuts, and ignored his wishes. A few months later, that minister sent his son away to a different kingdom in China because he feared what was coming. When the king heard about this, he saw this as a betrayal, and that the minister not only didn't trust the king, but that he was in fact a spy. So in an effort to brandish his power a bit, he ordered the minister to take his own life. Of course, being a loyal subject, he did. But in doing so, his last words, he said, "Fix my eyes upon the kingdom gates, so that I may watch the enemy enter," more or less. So a couple years later, the barbarians attacked. And at that time, the king remembered the words of his minister. And in great shame, he took his own life, covering his face, so that in the afterlife he would not have to face his minister and admit to his failure. Now, that was spreading himself out too thin, because he was taking on a war that, one, really served no other purpose than glory, and two, it put himself vulnerable because he extended his forces far beyond their capabilities. So rather than fighting only when necessary, he picked a fight. and in doing so, left himself vulnerable and exposed, and brought unnecessary attention. Now, you want to court attention at all costs, but you court attention to gain power, not expose vulnerabilities. Now, the observance of the law was all the Rothschilds. Now, if you know anything about banking worldwide, the Rothschilds should be a name to come to mind. And back in Germany, when the Jewish people were forced to live in the ghettos and everything, the Rothschilds were no exception. So the Jewish culture, actually, they took and they found a way to make this work for them, and they used it to their advantage. So they refused to allow outside personnel within the family system. And over time, the initial founder, Meyer, I forget his last name, Meyer Anthony, I believe, of the Rothschilds. Let me double check. I want to make sure I get that right for you. It was an interesting note, too. So when Meyer Amschel became a lender of money, and this is in the late 1700s, by the way, he took those principles of the ghetto that he had learned living in Germany and kept the power internal to the family. And when he had 5 sons in 1812, when he was on his deathbed, he refused to name a singular heir. And what he did was, not only had he not allowed anybody outside of the family within the operation, but in refusing to name one particular heir, he was effectively avoiding dissension, disillusion, and distrust among the brothers. And that was one of his main focuses in teaching his sons throughout his life, was maintain unity and power in the family. So when the brothers took over the operation, they decided they were going to expand outside of just Germany, and they wanted to control the entirety of Europe in the financial market. So each of the brothers went to various different areas. One went to France, one went to London, one went to Venice, and one remained in Frankfurt. And in doing so, James, actually, in France, became probably the strongest of them, and as he observed so many different changes between, the Caesars, the French Revolution, so on. There was a lot of change going on at the time, and as the rest of the world was crumbling around, the Rothschilds were able to maintain their power, and they did it for one reason. They followed the exact same system their father had taught them, and they maintained power. Not only did they maintain internal control, but they controlled communication. They wouldn't allow anybody else in, and they developed an internal code in old Germanic, Yiddish, I want to say, or Jewish, Yiddish, either way. It was a way of writing and communicating that only they understood. So anytime anyone from the other financial institutions tried to intercept, it didn't matter. They couldn't decipher the language. They didn't understand what it meant, so to them it was all gibberish. And it maintained their monopoly on information. So not only had they been able to expand their reach to key concentration areas in Europe, but they'd also monopolized communication within their department or their company. When it came time for one of them to marry, that became a major problem. So, unwilling to allow outsiders into their operation and inside the family, because they felt they couldn't trust anybody that wasn't part of the family, they came up with a plan to marry off the brothers to other wives, or other first cousins that become their wives. So while in modern day we don't necessarily see that to be an acceptable practice, that's what they did back then. And in doing so, that set the precedent for the Rothschilds for years to come, where each of the brothers and then their kids would marry first cousins to maintain that family tree. So instead of having branches here and there and everywhere, straight up and down. Maybe they're from Arkansas. But either way, they maintained power as close as they possibly could to the court. So the concentration of forces there allowed them to focus their efforts. Now, one final observance here is the key to power is, and you've probably heard this from other gurus and things, but what the Rothschilds did and what most of the other personnel in history that have maintained great power is they focused on a singular point, a singular goal, and they beat it into submission. Words directly from the text, they beat it into submission. So, prime example. If you decided you were going to make an awesome hot sauce and you were going to sell it worldwide, it doesn't matter how much competition there is. It doesn't matter that somebody else maybe has a more superior taste, flavor, price, whatever the case may be. If you concentrated your entire effort on making a sauce and putting it out there and making sure that enough people knew it and they couldn't think of having their food without it, and you just beat on that constantly for years to come, eventually you would become the number one sauce in the world. That goes with any product, any goal, anything, doesn't matter. So in my experience in years past, I was very spread thin. I had all these incredible goals, and I still do. I had all these things I wanted to do. But I couldn't pick on a singular thing because they were all important to me. So what I was doing was I took 10% of my efforts here, 10% there, and so on and so forth, until eventually I was so spread thin and so stressed out, nothing was getting done. I broke, imploded. And when I got to the point where I'm at now, more and more and more, I began to focus and realize that all these people who were able to become wildly successful, they had two things in common: intense focus on a singular goal, and they persisted, refusing to give up. So that's what I'm doing. I'm here bringing fantastic content to you, focusing on my overall goal, and I will not stop until I reach that goal. And I'll just probably pick a bigger goal when I reach that too. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it today. Concentrate your efforts. Talk to you tomorrow. Much love. Bye for now.